Okay, hello and welcome again to the Prickly Pear podcast. And I am joined with my friend and mentor, Professor Joseph Agassi, again today. And I wanted to speak with you about several issues in the world of psychology, because I find we are like-minded in our criticism sometimes. So, what is wrong with psychology?
Wow, that's the wrong question.
It's the wrong question?
Yes.
What is the right question?
What is of interest to you? Why are we talking about it at all?
We're talking about it because psychology is supposed to be the betterment of humans, of people.
What betterment? There are so many betterments. That's why there are so many fields. So what betterment are we talking about?
Reducing suffering?
Oh, no, there's all sorts of suffering. No can do. People who suffer hunger and people who suffer anger are two different people.
Yeah, this is true. In our last talk, you said it doesn't take a psychoanalyst to do damage to a person.
That is true too. It's very easy to harm people.
Yeah, and I find as psychologists, and I have often done this, unfortunately, is I have caused harm to people.
But you see, as a psychologist, whatever you do has a special category. I'm speaking of everyday life. In everyday life, when you bump into somebody, it's enough to say, who do you think you are? To remind what we talked about before, to do damage.
Yeah.
Very few people are immune to who do you think you are. I remember I was told repeatedly that I'm a nobody, and I knew I was a nobody. And my luck was that I didn't mind it. Most people lick their wounds.
Yeah, most people need to be someone.
I think when you cut to the chase, my psychology is this. You have to forgo insults, first of all.
To forgo insights.
Yeah, insults.
Insults, okay.
I found it so interesting that, for example, in the Arabic tradition, which is very important and has marvelous things in it, there is one big weakness. An Arab gets insulted whenever you insult him.
This is true.
This is unthinkable. It's a mistake. When I speak to students and I say, you are insolent, I often get to respond, I apologize if I insulted you. And I say, no, you didn't insult me. So he says, what do I have to apologize for? And I say, if you shoot somebody and you don't hit, you don't have to apologize.
Very nice. I remember a time in this day and age, there's a word that if you want people to listen to your podcast, you shouldn't even say the word, is what they call the N-word, the pejorative word for a Black individual.
Oh, yes, I once broke this taboo, and I explained at great length because I was referring to one of the loveliest autobiographies I know of a Black stand-up comic in America, one of the best, and he called his autobiography "Nigger."
Yeah. It is a strange thing where you're not even allowed to quote it in good contexts.
I remember when I started teaching in America, I told my students, you call me a kike and I call you gringos and we get along well. And the atmosphere froze.
Yeah,
I knew I made a mistake. It looked to me so obvious, so natural.
for sure, because it's there. So
It's
it's
that.
strange to
Yes.
ignore it. But I brought it up because I remember sitting in a counseling center in a university where the students come in with their troubles. And what happens in counseling centers a lot is what they call talk therapy. The assumption is you talk about something enough and then it gets, some magic happens. And they were talking about a student who was traumatized by being called a nigger, and he was very, very horrified, and it he had to go to therapy for this and everything around it, and everyone in the circle was just all shocked. We were going around being shocked at this horrible world and how the person would be called such a thing.
Are they shocked by calling people Jew as by calling people black?
I don't know. There seems to be this making insult holy, making insult the. That's what I was saying, that they spend so much time on understanding the person and months to give the person space to experience it, which makes sense on one end, but on the other end, it. Okay, we're back. Um, yeah, the making holy of insult, and the idea that to say in this day and age, to say you should get over it, whatever it is sacrilege.
Yeah, I found it progress when uh, some words that were taboo became common, like the word fuck. In fact, they overuse it, but that's another matter. I
Yeah,
think that letting it by is a great progress.
yeah, and on the field of for me, that's one of the big things that's a problem with psychology. Another thing that bothers me a lot is diagnosis, which I know is something you know a lot about, or have read a lot about. Um, but it is an interesting dilemma in that psychology tries to define people in order to find solutions to problems, but it seems that all they do is define more problems without necessarily bringing solutions.
What is, in my opinion, the commonest mistake is the dividing people into types. There are different theories in which people are divided differently, beginning, by the way, with antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
And what modern logic tells you is that any typology is as good as any other. You choose the one most comfortable to you. That's all there is to it.
Right.
And this pulls the rug from under a lot of discussions.
Yeah, there are a lot of competing personality theories, and
That's what I'm talking about, yes. They are all worthless because they don't refer to any problem, but appeal to intuitions. And our intuitions are easily malleable. This is what Piaget showed with his study of questionnaires. You word a questionnaire one way and you get one result, you word it slightly different and you get a different result.
yeah, that's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
The process of getting published is a process of knowing how to make a study that will make what you want to show.
Yes.
Not even a different question, but a different ranking system.
Right. So,
If you
right,
have a middle ground,
right. So
what,
this is why one should not trust one's intuition. One should use it, but not trust it.
right? That's a delicate balance.
Quite.
I find that I find for me the idea of diagnosis is or personality even can be helpful when it predicts the future. Uh, for example, the diagnosis of bipolar disorder is one of the few diagnoses that, when they are correct, they predict the future.
The main thing about bipolarity or any other mental characteristic of that kind is that you see a problem there even without stating it. But it's better to state the problem. Whether it's autism or bipolarity or schizophrenia, whatever it is, you have to state what is the difficulty. One example which I constantly speak of, I recommend schizophrenia. I recommend it as a systematic method of applying it all the time. And people are terrified, not realizing that it's not the schizophrenia that is frightening, but the loss of control. It's like fighting divorce because it's a bad thing. Divorce is a good thing. The cause for divorce is a bad thing. And people confuse these things regularly.
So the idea of schizophrenia, I'm trying to follow. The idea of schizophrenia is
terrific.
Is what?
Excellent.
To go into, to be in a world that is different.
To be different personalities. The one that fits the occasion best. Why not? If you have no control over it, then you are sick. It's a loss of control that makes you mentally ill, not either the depression or the schizophrenia or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We want to be in charge of our lives. We take this as normal, not in every society, by the way. In societies in which taking one's fate in one hand is not the standard, there is no schizophrenia.
I know in some societies the schizophrenia has a place. A person who hears voices in some society has a place.
Oh yes, he may be even holy.
Yeah.
But certainly not sick. So there's no schizophrenia.
Yeah. And that is a big problem in the diagnosis and in the psychology in general, is it focuses on the individual and doesn't show what the mental illness isn't just the individual, it's the individual within the context of their
What I want to stress is that what we are saying now is obvious. For example, when King David pretended to be mentally ill, he just pretended to have lost control. That's how he's described in the Bible.
I didn't know that.
So it's trivial. When he met the king of Lachish, it doesn't matter. But what people have difficulty is to confuse things. What are we troubled about? What frightens us? Not that you can be different personalities. In a sense, we all are all the time. To this degree or that degree, it doesn't matter. What matters is being in charge of our lives.
Which is an illusion, right?
Nobody is in full charge of one's life because we depend on our food and drink and friendship and so on. But if you look at people you appreciate more, you'll see that these are people more in control of their lives than others and using the control better, let's say, for the betterment of humanity.
Right.
Yes.
I want to quote yourself to you again, because you told me once, I asked you, what is a schizoid?
Yes.
And you told me something that made me think quite a lot. You said a schizoid is a person that society could not turn into a schizophrenic.
No. By definition, a schizoid is a person who has the ability to become schizophrenic under pressure. The thing begins with the idea that schizophrenia is inborn. Now, certainly it's not inborn in the sense that you need pressure to have it come out. So what it is that should come out with or without pressure is called schizoid. Another question is, how do you observe it?
Yeah.
And there was a study of it in Science magazine, a very long study, and they had a list of characteristics. If you answer positively more often, then you are more disposed to be schizophrenic. And one of the questions was, do you have a schizophrenic in the family?
Yeah.
And that was so stupid, I can't tell you.
Yeah, for sure. It is a
Because
very,
it was question begging, of course.
it was what?
Question begging. The question was, is being schizophrenic inborn? And if you ask other people in your family, then it becomes inborn.
They had, yeah, they had this great sensation-seeking questionnaire in the 80s, and they found, or in the 90s, and they found that it greatly correlates to drug use and substance use. And then
It was in the questionnaire.
it was in the questionnaire.
No. You see, the main thing is a questionnaire can be yes or no, and it can be yes, indifferent. Or
Mhm.
it can be yes, indifferent, no, 2 against 1. These are 3 different ways to write your questionnaire.
Yeah.
And you have, this is why before you use a questionnaire, you test it. And by the way, one of the commonest mistakes there is that people who use tests of the questionnaire don't throw away the results of the test, but add them to the results of the observation. And that, of course, messes up everything.
Ah, you're saying to take the test, test the validity of the questionnaire, and then not do it.
And then forget it if you get the right results. If you get the wrong results, you rewrite your questionnaire until you like the questionnaire. But then you forget all the tests and you begin afresh with a new test questionnaire. What I say is so common sense. I'm surprised that I have to say it, but I know that I do.
But then that's not really how publication works, because first of all, they have to prove the test is real and is valid. So to get published, you have to do the opposite of what you just said.
The more results, the better, and they don't care what results. That's the worst of it.
Yeah, yeah.
The right thing is to realize that publication pressure makes every publication suspect.
Yeah, completely.
Publication pressure is one of the worst things that has happened to the intellectual world recently.
Yeah, it's commodified scholarship, right?
Exactly so, exactly so. And then people are surprised that scholarship becomes commodified. Again, it's amazing how obvious things are.
Yeah, it is, and it's to me. I went into psychology with great naivete and great hope, and the more I studied and the more I learned and saw the world of psychology, the more disillusionment I had any steps along the way with the treatment and the research.
Right. Yeah, let me tell you what psychological item bothers me most.
Mm-hmm.
When I say to physicists, just because I'm a physicist, when I say to physicists, as you know, Newton's theory is false, they say, why do you hate Newton so? What did he do to you? Now, Newton was one of the greatest scientists ever. There's no question. He's number 1 or number 2. And he was mistaken. He couldn't know Einstein. Einstein showed Newton mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Einstein admired Newton. Einstein said that Newton was bigger than Einstein and explained why. And Einstein wrote, Newton, forgive me. This is a quotation, Newton, forgive me. So even Einstein, for whom criticism was just part of the intellectual world without any problem, he realized that for most people it's not like that it's an insult.
Yeah.
And why criticism is an insult, I do not understand. If you take, for example, in medicine, doctors like to play God. And it is amazing because when you play God, every mistake you make is faulty. Whereas if you are human, the law protects some of your mistakes. And whenever there is a disaster, there is an inquest. An inquest does not question the disaster, but it questions whether it was avoidable.
Okay.
For example, when Comet 4 lost its tail, the question was, were the engineers to blame?
When Comet 4?
Comet 4, a plane.
Okay.
It was a British passenger plane, very successful, lost its tail twice or thrice. And you understand, each time it's a major disaster when it loses its tail, because it loses its tail in midair.
Yeah.
So the inquest was whether it was to blame or not. Now, it turned out that a novel about engineers described this very incident. And the question was in the inquest, didn't you learn from this novel? And the answer was not. The novel had nothing to do with reality. It's very nice. So when a doctor plays God, he's shooting himself in the foot.
Because,
And yet,
sorry, continue, please.
and yet doctors like to play God. I don't understand that.
Well, everybody gets addicted to some story, no?
Yes, and we should change the addiction options and the preferability and so on.
Yeah.
As I told you, it's not the addiction, it's the control.
The control is the addiction, though, is it not?
That's the thing. People accuse the substance.
Yeah.
Instead of accusing the loss of control. That's it. Of course, there are exceptions. The point is that alcoholics have the brain consume alcohol instead of sugar, and that's a serious problem. But otherwise, it's not.
Yeah, there are many ins and outs to it.
Yeah, the use of heroin is problematic because it causes constipation.
Yeah, constipation, it causes several things. Constipation, lack of sex drive,
Yeah,
body temperature,
yeah, quite.
activity.
And people prefer not to discuss this thing. They say, my cousin is an addict and look how much he suffers. And that appears as an argument against investigation. It surprises me. Should be an argument for investigation.
Yeah,
Not against.
yeah. I follow on the internet on Instagram. One of the things, there's accounts that post success stories, and you have all these celebrities who are famous drug users, whether they're musicians or TV stars, and they just give you that little snippet of information, 27 years sober or such and such. And it feels like it idolizes a very small part of the issue without looking at the whole picture and what
Without looking is half of it. Forbidding to look at.
forbidding to look at it.
Because they are afraid of the results, especially when you show that the nicotine is worse than cannabis.
Yeah.
It shows you how much incidental our table of preferences is.
Yeah, completely. It's shaped by years of.
People forget that cannabis was legitimate until the 1930s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Forget that the first substance to be forbidden was alcohol. And when it failed, they looked for something else. This is incredible.
Yeah.
Story.
Of course, it's a story of population control and the need for incarcerations and wars.
I don't know why there is a need for incarceration. In the United States, jails are a major problem.
Yeah, it's there was a book about it. It was called The New Jim Crow.
Yes.
And the author made that point that the drug laws are a way of making slavery alive and well in the US.
Slavery is the wrong word, but never mind. I don't want to quarrel with that book now. Yes.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Um, Oh yeah, there was actually about heroin. There was a book that came out now, and it was a professor of neuroscience in New York, maybe NYU, one of the big New York universities, and he came out as a heroin user, and he is trying to champion his own agenda, which
Mhm.
I'm for, but he claims that there are more heroin users, functional heroin users, than there are dysfunctional heroin users. But of
It's
course,
possible. The more popular it becomes, the more correct this diagnosis is,
yeah,
of course.
but you wouldn't know it, and that's the problem with a lot of not just addictions but other problems. Is the more severe they are, the more the victims or the clients are in hiding.
Indeed, but whenever you talk about addiction, you must mention such things as gambling, because there is no drug there.
Yeah. Well, of course, there is a huge drug. It's dopamine,
Certainly.
coding
Again,
anticipated
again,
rewards.
no question about it. I always say whatever you get with drug use, you can do without drugs. It's not easy to find out how, but you can, yes.
Yeah. There's one final issue I wanted to talk about today. Uh, I had in my mind to talk about several different types of therapy, but we have talked enough today that I just want to talk about one, about the first Freud psychoanalysis and psychodynamics that came out of it afterwards. That whole that whole umbrella of different of talk therapy.
Yes.
And to me, I struggle with something that I think, for me, it feels false and true at the same time. That idea that the solution will come from talking.
If the problem is lack of communication, then the solution comes from talking. Wait a minute, that's all there is to it. Always look for the problem. And the major problem in psychotherapy is, what is the problem? It's not easy to locate the problem and to pinpoint it and to say what exactly it is. Because as the folk saying is, a well-put problem is half a solution.
Yeah. Yes. The
I always am surprised. Everybody agrees that a well-put problem is half a solution, and yet you don't find a book half of which is the problem.
half of which
What?
is about finding the problem.
Yeah, but what is the problem? Just that one. So simple.
Yeah, actually, the my favorite one of my favorite therapies works on that, and it's called motivational interviewing. And you once made the point that it was like Carnegie's book about how to make friends, and
And influence people, except that Dale Carnegie was manipulative, and that I don't like.
yeah,
But the problem is right. People are lonely, and they have to learn to make friends. Sometimes a student of mine praises a colleague of mine. So I say to him, go knock at his door and say a word to him. He says, but I don't know him.
yeah,
There are taboos that force loneliness on us, especially approach a woman. When a young student really wants the company of women, people say, aren't you ashamed of yourself? Rather than teach him how to approach women. It's so very strange. The obstacles that we put on ourselves as if there aren't enough by nature. I remember how difficult it was for me to approach a young woman when I was at my late teens. I felt an enormous urge to talk to women. By the way, not sex. That's really a great mistake. It may be prelude to sex, but it's not sex. The need to talk to women, and I could not approach a young woman.
I know the feeling. I have no
Yeah, it's
feeling.
terrible. Yeah, it is education. That's what I'm saying now.
Yeah,
First of all, education tells you that if you want to approach a woman, you want sex. And one of the great discoveries of Conrad Lawrence is that sex is not just copulation. That building a nest, for example, is a part of sex. This is marvelous.
Yeah, I never heard that, but that makes perfect sense.
You haven't read Carmen by Prosper Mérimée. It's a short story on which the opera is based.
No, I haven't. I know the character, but I haven't read it.
The story of Carmen is that the soldiers come to arrest young women who make trouble in a cigarette factory. And one of the young women, rather than be arrested, she sleeps with the soldier and he falls in love with her and then kills her. It's a 2-3 page story. It's a marvelous story. And she takes him home for sex. And on the way, she buys sweets in order to put on the wall to have the flies leave them alone. So much wonderful. Just by a few words, it creates a scene.
Yeah. I think I don't know where we are anymore in the conversation, but I think
My point was that we do not equip young people with the tools they need for proper, reasonable life. That's the point where I am at. I don't know about you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's where we start. That's an expression of one of the problems of psychology, is that we could have been using the tool to surpass the narratives, but instead
psychology should help us pinpoint the problems we have at every stage of life and how to facilitate things. That's all.
Yeah.
You raised the problem, not I.
Well, whatever. I feel like maybe I read into your words what problems I was seeing.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a pressure on everywhere, though. I remember one of my least successful cases. We had a mismatch of personality, me and the client, and he was almost on his knees. He was pleading. He was saying, "Why don't you help me? I came here to you for help."
Yeah, but look, you are speaking of sessions, psychology sessions, and I speak of classrooms. For example, hyperactivity, something not known when I was a child. And what I remember most, or only from second grade, is one sentence. Agassi, why can't you sit on your ass like everyone else? Here you have psychological problem in the classroom, not in a psychology session. It's much nearer to everybody's home.
Yeah.
People just don't know what people need. What are the problems?
Oh, the problem is clearly that you can't sit like everyone else. Weren't you listening?
No, the problem is hyperactivity, which is why I couldn't sit like everyone else. The teacher did not know about hyperactivity. It was not yet recognized.
But then again, the problem isn't really hyperactivity. The problem is that the context will not tolerate hyperactivity.
The problem is the trouble that the hyperactive causes to the environment. You are lovely. You are very good.
Yeah.
So you see, again, we find it so hard to pinpoint a problem.
A bit of a moving target.
And for this, there is a marvelous English expression, where does the shoe pinch?
Where does the shoe pinch?
Yeah, you have to find exactly where the shoe pinches.
Okay.